Please don't forget the money, man.
All my blessings, 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 all my blessings.
I need my blessings every penny, daily counting every single one, I'm seeing plenty.
Elliot is back in to talk a little bit more college football today. Recapping where we were last time where we discussed our pickings for the college football playoff. Now, I was off on one thing. First off, I thought our top five, conference championship winners would get the top five spots. It's only the top four that'll get buys. So I don't know if that's changed or I just wasn't quite paying attention. It seems a little strange to me. I realized that we're no longer a Power 5, but so Liberty, I took the liberty of bumping Liberty down to our 12 slot here. So as it would stand, my top four would be Ohio State, Georgia, Utah, and Miami. They would all get first-round buys, followed by Texas, Oregon, Texas A&M, Penn State, Alabama, Michigan, Florida State, and Liberty. Your lineup, just a little flip-flop with Georgia as the number one, then Ohio State, Florida State, and Utah. So you had Florida State, not Miami, winning the ACC, followed by a flip-flop with Oregon as the 5, Texas as the 6, Missouri making it in as the 7, Penn State, Notre Dame, Alabama, Michigan, and then Liberty at the 12 slot. Is there anything that you would change at a glance here? Because there's lots of different, depending on which talking heads you're listening to or what you're looking at. The top half of the SEC, especially in the Big Ten, the Big Ten, I should say, is pretty solidified with the top 4 teams. The SEC seems to have a wide range of opinions. Ole Miss, LSU, kind of all over the place. And then, kind of the pickings of the mid two almost, the ACC and the Big 12 there. And then I'd say, we discussed Boise State as well, but with an auto loss to Oregon almost, they could still win their conference championship. And we talked about the easy schedule of Liberty. Anything you would necessarily change, or are you pretty confident? I mean, preseason with your picks.
I think it's interesting that, the SEC probably has a large amount of good to great teams, but as we all know, like that upper echelon of elite teams, there's usually only a couple. And so looking at how those teams would fall into the bracket for the playoff, in mind, you'd have Missouri, Alabama playing each other. You'd have a Michigan, Texas rematch kind of thing. But curious how, we talked about last year with Michigan, Ohio State kind of thing. Like if they were to both get in, would they play a rematch kind of thing right away? And how the playoff, I don't know if there's criteria for those top 4. And then after that, like if they would change, alter somebody's seed by one just so you don't get some of those rematches, or
right, how
that would work. But you're going to see, there's a really good chance Oregon makes it, even losing to, Ohio State. Same thing for Ohio State if they lose to Oregon, or even if they were to lose to Michigan, they beat everybody else. So there's a lot of opportunities for rematches from earlier in the season. So it'd be interesting to see how those brackets play out and if they place teams on other sides or move around those seeds a little bit to get different matchups.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Obviously no reseeding during the tournament, but obviously pre-seeding ahead of time to move those matchups and essentially more or less rigging it so they don't play each other. Same as they've done kind of in the group of 4 and in other aspects as well. Sometimes, in anticipation of one team playing a big game a following week, rating them behind a team that they're probably better than, and expecting either a loss to keep them behind that team or a big win to move them ahead, that kind of thing in the power polls. So that kind of aspect, I certainly agree with that. So there's a lot that as far as the decision-making process in the original seeding from the playoff committee and how that's going to look, absolutely. I can certainly see that. And we could see rematches, the Big Ten and SEC especially, but will they try to avoid that in the initial, especially the initial rounds? So as you have it set up, so although we have some of the same teams, our lineups are quite different. So, for example, your first round, at least in one corner of the bracket here, your number 1 seed Georgia would be hosting the winner of Penn State Notre Dame, with Penn State being the host there, a Midwest battle, even though they're not both Big Ten teams. Would you anticipate Georgia being your Final Four team out of that side of the bracket there, or that corner?
Yeah, definitely. I think Georgia just has the depth to move forward, especially at that point in the season. And we still don't really know. Again, Notre Dame and Penn State are kind of the same. Like, they're good to great teams, probably, just based on roster. But it's probably not good enough to beat what I have Georgia as in that elite tier.
Yeah. They would play the 4 seed, or the winner of that particular side. Currently, your 4 seed is Utah with a bye. They'd play the winner of Oregon Liberty. Oregon Ducks hosting the Liberty Flame. That almost seems like a bye, to some. And perhaps moving forward, that'll be a point of contention, that like one of those middling 5C 5-12 matchup. That will be a point of contention. And in your bracket especially, you'd have the Oregon-Utah matchup then, like a Pac-12 meetup. Former Pac-12 meetup, which is hard to avoid now because they're Big 12 and Big 10. So would they try to avoid that at least this initial year? Would you have, I know you have Oregon ranked ahead, would that be the offense? Oregon's supposed to be a well-regarded team all the way around, but it'd really be a battle of offense and defense with Oregon and Utah in that particular corner to take on Georgia.
Yeah, and I still wonder if I'm too high on Oregon coming into this year, but just watching them last year, like they are a really solid team, and I think it's that consistency year to year as well. But Utah has that too. I mean, Utah's got to have, what is this, his 5th year, 6th year? How long has Cam Rising been there? Forever?
It might be like 7th at this point, actually.
So,
something like that, yeah.
If he can be healthy towards the end of the season, which he has not been, that could be a very good game.
Yeah, so consistent with Utah there. No quarterback play to speak of last year, and they still won 9 games. And Oregon lost their they lost their quarterback, obviously, and brought another great kid in Dylan Gabriel. Lost their top wide receiver running back. Brought another great running back in, though, replacing Bucky Irving. And sometimes it's pick and choose with the wide receiver core, but they brought another great transfer in from Texas A&M, Evan Stewart, I believe, former 5-star. So just a great, again, consistency there. So you'd have Georgia and Oregon playing on that side of the bracket. And on the flip side, you would have number 7 Missouri hosting number 10 Alabama in an SEC battle to take on number 2 Ohio State.
That'd be kind of great, wouldn't it? If you get, I mean, that place would be wild. And if they could get by Alabama, and you'd have a rematch of Missouri and Ohio State from the bowl game, or Missouri beat Ohio State.
Yeah.
And I'm sure Ohio State fans are still feeling a certain type of way about that. That'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. The bottom half of this bracket, you have a little more diversity, which I think would be great. Number 6, Texas would host number 11, Michigan, and they'd go on to play number 3, Florida State. Obviously, they'd have a chance the Longhorns have a chance to beat the defending national champion and the team that was snubbed for making the playoffs last year.
So, and again, like, Texas plays at Michigan week 2. I mean, literally in 3 weeks here, which is crazy to think about. And then potentially a playoff scenario where Michigan would have to go to Texas for a rematch could be great. And then Florida State, who obviously big snub last year, but has a chance to really make some noise by beating what should be a very good to great Texas team. or Michigan.
Yeah. So would your top? Do you think your top 4 teams would be the 4 there? I mean, Texas, Michigan, I think would still be a great battle. Again, we don't know exactly where Michigan would be. Florida State has questions too. Alabama, Ohio State would be great. Are you still mapping like a Georgia, Ohio State national championship game there?
Yeah, and I think that, like we talked about last time with the Michigan and Florida State teams being somewhat similar, where there are question marks at quarterback, and the rest is, they've got some really solid people returning that got a lot of experience last year, even though they both lost a lot of starters to the NFL. And I do think Florida State would probably move on there to play Ohio State, and Georgia and Oregon. And I think you'd have everything kind of setting up for your Georgia Ohio State rematch from a couple of years ago.
My 8-9 would be Penn State hosting Alabama to take on number 1 seed Ohio State. That would be a great, however that worked out, I think that would be very good. There's a lot of high expectations of Alabama. Again, there was a lot of doubt going in the season last year. There was a lot of building thanks to Nick Saban holding things together. And there's a lot of expectation for this staff, DeVore, to do the same thing. And like, I don't know. I think there's a lot of talent. I think they might be one of the most talented teams in the country, obviously. I'd have them going on the road. I think of pulling an upset at Penn State. That'd be difficult. But I think I would have them losing at Ohio State, moving on to the Final Four. My 4 seed would be Miami of Ohio. They'd be playing the winner of 5 seed Texas hosting Liberty. That's a tough one right there, especially because Texas needs to fortify the back end. It's the front end that was holding opponents to, I think, less than 3 yards per carry.
Did you say Miami of Ohio?
Did I say that? Well, hey, let's go Red Hawks, right?
I don't think so. I was so confused.
Hurricane,
I don't think that's right.
So Liberty with that top rushing attack, having to throw over those stout defensive linemen, I think would have real troubles, obviously. So Texas is the 5 seed. I think I'd have going on the road and upsetting the 4 seed Miami of Ohio, moving on.
You did it again.
Oh, no, I did, didn't I?
The U.
Although I could see Miami winning that too, but we're going to move on with Texas as I had ranked. I think I have a fun little matchup here. Number 7, Texas A&M, which no one's really projecting to be in the bracket, although betting odds have them in there with Miami of Florida. Yep. So number 7, Texas A&M hosting number 10, Michigan, with the right to go play number 2, Georgia. I don't know. College Station, that's tough, man, right? College Station, They might have the better quarterback. They might have the better... they're sorting through some receiver stuff. The defense will take you a long way, but I think their defensive front might be very good. So I might just kind of go chalk with Texas A&M, Georgia beating Texas A&M and moving on. So I might go chalk there. My number 6 would be Oregon hosting number 11, Florida State. I do like the Ducks to go on and play Utah just as you had in the second round. I think that'd be a tough road game, but they've won there before, and I think I'd have the same. So I'd have number 1 Ohio State playing number 5 Texas, and number 2 Georgia playing number 6 Oregon, just the way that I have it mapped out. And I would have Ohio State, Georgia as well. That's definitely probably not how it's going to turn out for us, but I have Ohio State winning the national championship, even though we have more confidence in Carson. I have more confidence in Carson Beck.
I think the Ohio State-Texas matchup could be really interesting. I don't know how much history there is there between those two teams playing. I can't recall them playing in my lifetime, but maybe they have. That's 2 great brands, though. That would be a great game.
That would be phenomenal. I completely agree. Any Oregon-Georgia would be pretty solid as well. I really like that a lot. So to transition a little bit here, to tackle just a few points that we haven't quite yet going into the college football season. We're not sure how Alabama, Colorado, Michigan, Iowa, we're not sure what any of those teams will look like. Which of those are you most excited to see? Do you expect obviously big Michigan alum? Do you have high expectations for the offense this year? Probably going to lean into that run pretty strong.
I think everybody, whether they want to admit it or not, is interested in seeing what Colorado's going to be, right? I mean, prime time is just a polarizing figure because he tries to be, but
yeah,
I mean, they could be really fun to watch. They're going to have great, quarterback play, and we'll see if they got enough offensive linemen to keep them upright for longer than 2 seconds.
56 sacks last year.
That's horrific.
Yeah.
That sounds painful.
Mm-hmm.
Iowa, I think, we'll see what they are with, Cade McNamara at quarterback being healthy. God, they can't be any worse on offense, right?
They really can't.
It's not possible.
I'm not even sure Cade McNamara is actually cemented in that position. And I believe news just came out that Kirk Ferentz is going to suspend himself for a half of a game because of early contact and trying to bring McNamara over.
The irony.
Yeah, I know, right? And he didn't even play last year. Yeah, so.
Yeah, and also Michigan getting penalized for recruiting violations as well, and Iowa suspending themselves for doing the exact same thing of a Michigan player. But whatever. I think, Iowa's always going to be. See, it's a different Big Ten now, though. Where Iowa would, could run that side of the. Well, I guess Northwestern had been doing pretty good for a couple of years too.
They have their moments.
East and West is gone, right? So
divisions are all gone in the Power Four, yes.
So Iowa still just might be a middle of the pack team because you've got USC, Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, Oregon, Washington. Where does Iowa fit in that ranking? Can Iowa beat a Washington or an Oregon or I don't even know who's on their schedule this year, but I don't know. And then I think seeing those teams too play at Iowa. Iowa is notoriously tough place to play. It's not talked about like Penn State or Ohio State or Michigan, but it's known for not having a lot of area to warm up, not having a place where quarterbacks can go and throw around a lot on the sideline and things like that. It's known for being really hostile to away teams. And for teams that have not played there before, that's kind of that recipe for an upset. So, and Iowa's known for doing that. And I think they could be, again, a really solid team where if they could score, what was the benchmark there? Was it 25, average 25 points a game, or his son would get fired from being offensive coordinator?
I think that was it. And as they scored fewer and fewer points, it's now you need to average 35 points a game.
Right. Right. Now Iowa needs to score 42 points a game for you to keep your job. And that was, when's the last time they've done that? That's the real question, right? I don't know. Iowa, I think, is also a pretty attractive brand. I mean, they've got the the Hawkeye wave and all that stuff at halftime for the Children's Hospital. It's pretty awesome. But they really need to give them something to cheer for more than just their special teams and their MVP of their punter every game. So, if they score 28 points a game, they can win a lot more games.
I didn't hate the running backs last year. I mean, it's a conference that has a lot of, we're talking about good running backs in college football. There's 50 of them, to be honest, right? And what's kind of lost in translation when we're talking about good college football players is sometimes we're talking about guys that will also translate to the NFL and are not just good college guys. And obviously the NFL doesn't value running backs because there are so many good running backs, right? But they did have some talent there. His name's eluding me right now, but I mean, when you don't have a pass game to help free him up a little bit there, that's a big problem. So just competent quarterback play, even a tight, bring in plenty of tight ends. A tight end that can catch the ball and one guy that can throw it, and it's going to do wonders for them. Let alone if they got a good receiver in there, something going. I think they had more passes completed to tight ends and running backs through the first quarter of the season last year than receivers, which is wild.
Yeah, they're a unique team in that aspect, right? And that has to change, and it can't get any worse. So who do they even bring in as offensive coordinator? I don't even know. Did they promote from within? That's usually what they do.
To be honest, I haven't checked. I've looked at a lot of things, and I'm kind of like, well, maybe Iowa will move from 124th to 115th this year. And
Well,
I'm like, whatever happens. I mean, does it? Because again, it's really up to the head coach. It's really up to Ferentz whether they make some big moves, whether they actually let anyone cut loose. Because they didn't bring in any big transfers on the offensive side of the ball. You can't really change anything, you know?
yeah. Well, I guess Iowa's a big question mark then in that regard. Alabama, again, like we said, they have a lot of talent. And they brought in some guys as well, and DeBoer brought a lot of his staff with him from Washington, and that guy's a winner. Like, he has just won at every level he's been at. He really doesn't lose very often, and so that's a great pedigree for a guy to bring in to follow up. Obviously, the legend of Nick Saban. How much does he try to change their current identity? Or is he, great coaches will obviously build schemes to their players. And he's got Milroe there, who's not known for being a super accurate passer, right? It's kind of a bit different than what he was working with at Washington with Penix. So I think that will have to change, and we'll see how all those parts mesh together. I think they're always kind of set up for success just based on the pedigree of people that are there.
Yeah.
But, is it enough to win a lot of those close games? I mean, you even think last year, like we talked about before, they should have lost to Auburn. That game they should have lost. That was a miracle they won that game.
Mm-hmm.
But then they have enough talent to go and beat Georgia. So it's there, but can they put it together?
Yeah. Milroe is a good deep ball thrower. He has that going for him. So I wonder if we just see him kind of on cork. He kind of leans into his athleticism running the football, which is what, they ended up doing with Saban. I'll just let him run the ball on some of the short yardage stuff and let him take shots downfield 20 plus yards. Let's just do some of that. But yeah. But is this team going to jump ahead of Texas and jump ahead of Georgia? Where's it going to be? I mean, again, we're nitpicking over a team that's in the top 10 or higher. So Nick Saban, then his move, he'll be on College Game Day. I'm not sure about Pat McAfee. I liked him for a while. He's high energy. Some of those guys are interchangeable as far as their energy level and what they really provide. But Pat McAfee is high energy. He's a changeup. That's great. I'm a little over it in his what he brings now. But Nick Saban, we got a little of that dry humor. He can play along. He can add a little bit. He can step back when he needs to. Obviously, he's just older. That comes with age and all that. But he's also obviously he's been a coach and brings that intelligence. And I think he'll be an awesome addition. He's supposed to do a number of things across, like air quote, across ESPN platforms, I believe is what the one article said, or the press release said. But I'm very excited to see him because in the different things that he's done, it's been pretty fantastic. I'm just really excited to see him. I think he's great. Gets up in the morning, eats his 2 little Debbies, and then he's ready to roll.
Yeah, he gives great commentary and insight. He's on Hard Knocks. That first episode, have you seen that with the Bears? He's brought in there, and he gives some pretty good insight into his philosophy for quarterbacks. You know, Urban Meyer was not necessarily a great commentator or anything like that, but he did do some good analysis when he was on Fox. It just when he got to some of the like game day stuff, he just happened to be wrong a lot. But his analysis and breaking down film was excellent and was fun to watch.
Yeah.
And I hope they do some similar stuff with Saban. And I think his perspective is going to be very interesting, especially why he left, which was a lot of the changing and recruiting and things like that. So, which is going to continue to change and evolve, and you could see why maybe somebody that like Nick Saban with his experience just wouldn't. He's won enough. Maybe he doesn't want to deal with that kind of stuff anymore.
Right.
And it's one thing to keep up with the transfer portal. NIL is a whole nother deal where everything is out in the open. It's a giant open market, right? And you're trying to build a team that's supposed to work together instead of buying individual players and pieces, which is more like professional sports. So I think his insight will be great, and I look forward to hearing more from him.
I can't wait to see some of his picks and why he makes them, because I don't know that he's someone that really, obviously he says he's one that doesn't stick to rankings. Everyone says that, but there's some validity to that. A good chunk of coaches take the coach's poll, and I think some of them take it seriously. I'm not sure if he's one of those or not, but I think his insight, I assume you'll be on the picking aspect of it. I think that'll be interesting to see. That's one part I can't miss. That's one part I really like to see just before kickoff.
Yeah.
Do you care about the Pac-12 being gone? If it like comes back in some iteration, it seems like it'll be really depowered. The Power 5 has a nice round number, but also this bye thing for the top 4 conference championships works kind of nice. But it's also nice to have a nice like West Coast conference as far as travel and to kind of square it away in your mind and all that.
I don't think so. I love, and I've said this before, I love the tradition of college football. That's kind of what makes it what it is, right? That's kind of what separates it from professional sports, as well as like, you're graduating tens of thousands of alumni every year that are, built-in kind of fan base that way. But I love that we have bigger brand, bigger team names moving to these conferences where instead of maybe you get to see, Texas play, Michigan or somebody like that in a bowl game if you're lucky, or Washington play Michigan in the playoff kind of thing. Like, I don't know. I always look at the schedule and you hear about people getting scheduled in 5 years ahead, 6 years ahead. In 2030, Michigan's going to play Texas. Well, that could get canceled. It usually does, right? To replace with somebody else. Schedules change, conferences change, media rights change.
Why bother scheduling that far out?
Right. But now they're in the conference, and you get USC and Washington, Oregon and Ohio State and Penn State, and you're guaranteed those games. Like, those teams will be playing, and I love that. I think that's great. I think it's great for the sport. And I didn't grow up in Pac-12 country, so not really going to miss that. And I know this is mostly about football, but I think basketball for the Pac-12 teams that got absorbed into the Big 12, that is going to be great because the Big 12 is a great basketball conference. And it'll be amazing to see Arizona play, Baylor and Kansas and Kansas State and all that, Oklahoma State. So I think it's great. I think it's great for the sport. You get more primetime excellent games just on a day-to-day.
Yeah, that'll be fun to see a mix like that, certainly. In that kind of southern, I don't know what you call it, just that southern desert region. But yeah, that's a fun mix-up. And again, it could all change again in the future. I kind of like the Pac-12 at night, and I like that mix there. I guess, is it the...
Yeah, but nobody watched it. Nobody watched Pac-12 at night, so nobody even knew how good those teams were.
Well, the voters certainly didn't. The voters for anything certainly didn't. Yeah, you can't Yeah, that's true.
I mean, it was late. It was late for even West Coast, right? You had Arizona games and UCLA games and USC games starting at 9 p.m. That's midnight Eastern for the beginning part of the year, before daylight savings and all that, and then it's only 2 hours. But that's too late. Nobody's watching that late.
Yeah, well, that kind of leads to my next part here. How much will travel you think impact wins, losses, the viewing? Because Oregon's still going to be hosting games, USC, UCLA. I don't know that all those are going to be bounced to afternoon Pacific. Is that right? Am I right on that? Yeah, because it'd be evening Eastern Pacific afternoon, right? They'd have to do some night games. They're still going to have some late night stuff. Perhaps it does adjust the expectation that all home West Coast games are going to be night games. Therefore, 9 p.m. plus late starts on the East Coast, though.
Yeah, I think it will have an impact. I think that you'll probably, in 5 years, 4 years, you'll be able to almost schedule some losses like you see in the NBA with back-to-backs traveling. And, taking a whole team across the country is a little bit different even than just like a basketball team, right? Because you're talking, with personnel, you're talking like 100 to 150 people when a football team travels, right?
Yeah.
If not more than that, if you're taking cheerleaders and bands and other things, right? So you're talking a lot of people, but for the players, yeah, a 3-hour time difference, a 4-hour, 5-hour flight, and then having to play right away. I don't know. I don't really know how it works right now. I guess they probably fly out more than a day before and stay and practice a day and then play their game at noon or early afternoon or whatever. I guess, do they have 10 a.m. starts on the West Coast? I think they do sometimes, don't they? Don't they have early starts?
They do have some. The middle of the country, like Pac or Big 12, is kind of weird sometimes. I know they hate like 11 a.m. starts. Yeah, they don't have a lot of noon starts because they could do noon starts, Pacific time, I mean.
Right.
Yes, they could make adjustments in that capacity. But if they want to have night games, again, you're still late night East Coast, which is where 80% of the population is. But yeah, we'll see. And we'll see if there are complaints about that and if there's any realistic adjustments to be made there, because there's still paid for airtime that you need to put games on TV too. I mean, that's a bulk of your money, right? I think it's California that travels. They travel like the equivalent of around the world in travelage mileage, because they have like Hawaii, and they're actually, obviously they're on the Pacific Coast, but they play in the ACC, the Atlantic Coast Conference now, right, just as a little reminder, and they're traveling back and forth. They've got some insane travel schedule for California there. Lucky if they make a bowl game as it is, and now it's just like, good luck, guys. Good luck with that. And you're, actually people that are supposed to be studying and doing real life stuff. So now the Heisman race is going to be all up in the air this year. Dillon Gabriel is the favorite. Betting odds as far as everywhere I've looked. Dillon Gabriel there at Oregon, followed by Carson Beck, Quinn Ewers, and then it's a little bit all over the place. But our top three of our top 4 teams have their quarterbacks in the mix there. And then Will Howard, who we're not sure about, of Ohio State, is down a few spots. Generally, Jackson Dart's in the mix, Jaden Milroe, Cam Ward. We have Nico Iamaliva. I feel like I say that pretty okay for my pronunciations, but I'm sure it's wrong. From Tennessee is up there fairly high, the 5-star freshman. And Riley Leonard from Notre Dame, I feel like is kind of a sneaky one. Maybe Connor Wingman from Texas A&M, although, as I've stated, I like what they have the potential to do there. So just kind of a wild race there. Does it kind of feel like, I guess I'm not entirely sure if this is because the voting is always taking place at the end of the regular season. So I assume that's still going to happen even with the change to the playoffs. Does it kind of seem like just the best quarterback on the best team is that just going to be it?
That's usually the way it works, isn't it? Is that your team, you have to be winning, right? You got to be putting up so much better numbers than everybody else.
Yeah, that was Jaden Daniels last year, right?
Right. And that's kind of an outlier. Usually your team has to be undefeated and you're the quarterback, basically. That's pretty much the criteria. Even though it's not listed that way, right? But yeah, so I think Carson Beck is probably who I would think.
I have a little Carson Beck money down.
And that's because he's got the experience there. He did lose, obviously, their tight end to the draft, who put up big numbers. But I think he's probably got the most consistent offense. He usually has the defense to give him the ball back, as much as possible.
And he has to play a tougher schedule this year.
Yeah.
We'll get to that, but he's got to play a tougher schedule this year. So,
but I think that he's probably got the chance to impress the most there with that. Of course, if Dylan Gabriel just comes out, and they run the table, I think that would be close, between him and Carson Beck. Yeah. I think yours is right here. As what plus 1,000 here is a little bit of a distant third, because we just don't know how good Texas can be.
Yeah, I had to reload that wide receiver core.
Right. And then after that, I think that next tier and group, Will Howard, Jalen Milroe, Cam Ward, do their teams, are they just plug and play, right? And they pick up where they left off with Ohio State, and they have, they lost, it's probably a generational receiver in Marvin Harrison, right? That's what people are saying. Right. He went what? He went second? Or fifth? I can't remember.
We get all excited for the draft, watch all their projections, then watch the draft, and now, hell, I can't remember. I'm just excited for the NFL.
Well, it doesn't matter. But, I think, regardless of position, he's was known as, the best player in the draft, by far. The way the draft goes by position, run on quarterbacks and things like that changes things, but and need, obviously, for teams. But Marvin Harrison was incredible, and obviously Ohio State thinks they have the next guy, but we'll see what that connection is with Will Howard, and if their offensive line has taken a step forward, and if they have balance in their offense, because that matters too, right? Obviously you get more numbers if you're just throwing the ball 60 times a game,
right?
There are teams that don't do that. I mean, Michigan averaged probably 20 to 25 passing. It tried to be balanced, but wasn't,
Right.
So that makes a difference too.
I think that's the thought process behind Dylan Gabriel, right? Faster pace, going to be up tempo. That's what they're going to do. And I think that's the thought process there as well with Nico at Tennessee, kind of, faster pace. And Garrett Nussmeier at LSU, his odds were a lot further. He's around plus 2,200. I'm looking at DraftKings right now. I think it's plus 2,000 at MGM. I think I put some money down on him at plus 5,000 a while back, but could LSU have back-to-back Heisman winning quarterbacks there? Because again, they're back into their defense. It's going to be a lot of question marks. He's going to have to put the ball up. So, yeah,
right. You get into shootouts like Texas had last year, and you're going back and forth, and your quarterback looks great. It's because your defense can't stop anybody, right? And you're getting the ball back because they've scored in 2 plays, and you got to go play catch up. So you got to put up numbers.
Well, that's perfect, Elliot. So I have a list of my top 10. I have a couple lists. I just like making lists because I'm like, I kind of like this team, and I kind of like this team. But where do I categorize them as far as, I'll put up my top 20 list because sometimes I'm just throwing darts at a board for my last 5, top 20 teams that I like. Obviously, we kind of got a top 12 submitted. But top 10 I call them top 10 TV teams. I haven't found a clever little nickname for them yet, which is too bad because that's my thing. But like top 10 teams I'm excited to watch on television. If you've got a few, throw them at me. If we want to march through these here. So and perhaps I regret my order of some of these, but I tried to put them in order. Like besides the big games I'm watching and some of the local stuff or whatever, like who am I searching for? So I'm just going to start at the top and not go 10-1 like a surprise number one. I'm just going to start at number one. Colorado, Sador Sanders and Travis Hunter at the tippity top of like watchability, also NFL prospects. How much is Travis Hunter going to, how many snaps is he going to play this year? Can he stay healthy without any cheap hits? That's another thing, because obviously he played 9 games last year. I think he missed 3, so he technically played only 3/4 of the season last year. And Shedeur Sanders, despite taking that 50-plus sacks, had 23 touchdowns and only 3 picks, which seemed, I had to double check that. They returned Jimmy Horn Jr. Remember, they actually had 3 or 4 good receiving targets last year. Hunter, Horn, and a couple other guys. But if you count Sador's, Hunter, and Horn, those are the only returning offensive starters. They changed everyone else out. They do have some new players on the offensive line and number 1 transfer class overall. They did bring in Hayden. They brought in Hayden from Ohio State, the running back there from that crowded backfield, who I think is a quality running back there. Defense, we'll see. There's going to be some guys that certainly stand out. Their schedule, they open up against North Dakota State. They play at Nebraska. That was a game that was pretty boring for almost a full half last year before they put up, I think it was 2 touchdowns just in the last couple minutes before the half to kind of take the lead and ran away with it there. At Colorado State, which is a game that they really probably should have lost last season. They're home against a struggling Baylor team. At UCF, who is on my list. Home against Kansas State. At Arizona. Home against Cincinnati. At Texas Tech. Home against Utah. At Kansas. Home against Oklahoma State. That's a brutal last 3 games. But they have interesting teams to play on the schedule. Games that they're going to have to compete with. Not just teams that they're going to flat out beat by 50 or lose to by 50, hopefully. They should be better than last year. NFL prospects. Good college players, fun games, all the hype. Hopefully not as much as last year, but like appropriate hype. Like this is a fun coach and a fun program, and they have some good dudes. So my number 1 is Colorado.
I agree with that. I think Colorado is, they, like I said before, they got prime time. They do have great skill players that you want to watch, and all the storylines. Yeah, the media hypes it up. Things like that, but also, what happened in that Colorado-Oregon game last year, where Oregon was basically like, yeah, we know what we're about to do. We're about to end these guys' season, and
right.
That's it's exciting, and it's puts a little chip on your shoulder, and you get to see how they respond, and that game at Nebraska, that'll be a great way to start the season.
Oh yeah, I think that'll be huge there for Husker Nation. My number 2 team, I do have Kansas. They sucked for so freaking long. Lance Leopold, obviously, who won a fistful of rings at a lower level. Was it Grand Valley? No, one of the valleys, lower level. I had it all memorized, but now it's been a few years. He's been hanging out at Kansas. It's left me, but you watch any game, they will give you the full biography of Lance Leipold and all that he's accomplished at lower levels of college football. National championship winner, though, several times over. The past 2 years, he's won more games at Kansas than they did the previous 8 years combined. Now, obviously, to those of us that have been around the block, that's no surprise. We're used to Kansas winning 2 games, 1 game, no game. But last year, especially without their exciting quarterback, let me get this right. This is a Jalen. This is a Jalen Daniels. There are Jadens and Jalen's all over the place. It really throws me off. Very exciting quarterback. he played like 3 games, including a couple junker, meaningless early preseason games, not preseason, early season games against nobodies that didn't really matter last year before he got banged up. And then much like Cam Ward, he was questionable the rest of the season. At least we got a couple of games from him, unlike Cam. And he never came back. So he played with his backup there, old Jason Bean, the Bean Boy, and he had some big explosive games in this offense, but it's just not the same. So here we go. Daniels is back. Again, 2007 they won a shocking 12-1. That is not entirely unattainable in this questionable Big 12, same conference Colorado was in. Our running back Devin Neal was back in, 1,600 yards and 16 touchdowns last year. Again, explosive offense, dual threat quarterback. They have a trio of senior receivers are back that all have varying skill sets that play off each other. Lance Arnold, Quinn Skinner, Luke Grimm. The secondary is actually supposed to be pretty senior heavy and actually pretty decent this year. Front seven tops out at a lot of 6'2", 6'3", 6'4" guys, not a lot of size there, which is problematic. You don't want to see a fun team with its quarterback sidelined because they're getting run to death. No one likes to see that garbage. But otherwise, a fun team. Now, unfortunately, they're like some teams I generally keep off these lists because they play one team that's currently ranked in the top 25. But as far as level of competition for this squad, which may be another 8 or 9 win team, it could potentially win more games with a softer schedule. We have Lindenwood to open up with, so get your party hats on for that one. They do play at Illinois. That'll be a fun one about their level. UNLV, a good team last year, had some transfers out. At West Virginia, who's a feisty team, home against TCU. At Arizona State, home against Houston. At Kansas State, home against a good Iowa State team. At BYU, home against Colorado, and at Baylor. So though the schedule, they should be favored against the majority of these teams. Not necessarily from a watch perspective. Again, you don't want to see anyone get beat by 4 touchdowns or necessarily win by 4 touchdowns, because then it changes gameplay, guys get subbed out, that kind of thing. It's around their level. They should win a bunch. They've got fun players. I'm very excited. Go Jayhawks. Rock Chalk.
Rock Chalk.
Yes.
I don't have much to add to that. That was pretty good.
Oh,
just your excitement.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Well, my number. So those were pretty easy for me. My number 3 is actually Tennessee. Now we talked about everyone, but we talked a little bit about Tennessee now. But this 5-star kid, like let's see him. Let's see what he can do. He was basically penned in as the starter since they brought him in. They play this fast-paced offense. It didn't really fit the big-armed kid they had last year. What was his name again? The former Michigan.
Wasn't that also Milrow?
Yes, it was. Milton, there we go. See, we're on these names. He will fit this fast-paced offense, according to, articles, reports. 2 of their top receivers are back. Brew McCoy, who I believe was a former USC Trojan. He was banged up last year. And old Squirrely White, Mr. Squirrel White will be back. They brought a number of transfers in that are, pretty productive, not necessarily top guys at their respective schools, but productive players. Leipold said it's their deepest core ever. It just lends itself to be another fireworks show, much like it was a couple of years ago with Hendon Hooker. They might have the top defensive player off the board in the next NFL draft, and James Pierce Jr. And the secondary isn't the best, which is why they're not on a, we can make the playoffs national championship type list. But that lends itself to more fun games, right? They open up against Chattanooga, whatever. Then they play NC State, which is known for their defense. That'll be an interesting kind of opposite thing. I think we'll have a little bit of a run-heavy defensive, generate pressure, front 7 pressure from NC State, while Tennessee is trying to throw over the top on the Wolfpack there. That's a very broad, game plan there, but there you go. Kent State then, so another sleeper in there. But then they play at Oklahoma, at Arkansas, home against Florida, home against Alabama, Kentucky, Mississippi State, at Georgia, and they kind of finish with a couple more duds, UTEP and at Vandy. So there are sleepers in there, no doubt, but they do get Oklahoma, Alabama, Kentucky should be all right. Arkansas, we'll see. That's a road game, though. Georgia, Florida should be good, even though they've got a brutal schedule. They do play non-conference against NC State at least, so I'm excited to see what could be a future Heisman winner here. Any thoughts on Tennessee?
Not a ton. We'll see how they get way more hype, I think, every year than maybe they deserve.
Agreed. But one of
But
these days they gotta meet that, right?
I know, right? That's what the thing. It's gotta be one of these days. Well, I think since Hendon Hooker, I mean, he was phenomenal, but there was a drop off there with Milton, and then we'll see if they got the next guy.
The next team I have, my fourth, is, let's see, I have a lot of notes. No, do I not have a lot of notes on this one? Number 4. I put notes down. I did not put the team down. Competent defensive coach, Mike Elko. Oh, that means Texas A&M. That's what that means. Now, no one's going to probably agree with me on this. That's fine. You can raise your hand. You can kick your foot and say, who the fuck wants to watch Texas A&M? That's perfectly fine. Fact of the matter is, the highest graded recruiting class ever was through here 3 years ago now. 2 years ago was still a top recruiting class. They play like the slowest pace ever under Jimbo Fisher. They wouldn't bring any transfers in. And it's right. They were banged up and guys really seem to hate it. But now they bring a beloved former defensive coordinator back in, Mike Elko. He got his teeth in over there at Duke and did quite well. Now he's back over here with some good defensive players. The fact is, can they stay healthy? Can they maximize their talent? Because I think some of their records from the past couple of years are a number of different factors, including health. Connor Wingman could be a really good quarterback. He was good when he's been healthy the past 2 seasons, which hasn't been very often, or against great competition. Tight end Donovan Green has also been banged up, but he'll be starting at the end of the line there as well. Defensive end Nick Squandron led the Big Ten with the Purdue Boilermakers there with 10 sacks last year, and Elko was able to pull him over to Texas A&M Aggies there. They've got a couple others, the Shamar Turner and Shamar Stewart back on the D-line as well for what's always a loaded group there. Linebacker Teron York was a true freshman that started last year, and he's now a captain on this team. The schedule, of course, as we know, Notre Dame is in the opener. Then they play a little easier one against McNeese State, play at Florida, then take a breath against Bowling Green, play Arkansas, neutral site, then get that mighty Missouri team, play at Mississippi State. The LSU Tigers, they play at that dangerous South Carolina team, home against New Mexico State, at that feisty Auburn Tiger team, and end the year in a rivalry game against the Texas Longhorns.
Perhaps you're right. I don't have a ton to say about Texas A&M.
Yeah. Perhaps they ranked too high.
How many of those players from that class are still at Texas A&M?
I don't have an exact count. They certainly lost. Stewart was a great receiver that they had. He's one of the notables. He moved over to Oregon.
Right.
But they've had a couple defensive linemen move out. I don't have an exact count. Obviously, it's hard to keep track when they had 2 different portal windows and guys leaving and guys coming back and that kind of thing. So I couldn't find an exact number, and I just didn't take the time to, there's a Michael Welch stats and info, and sometimes he's a little overworked. But I didn't go through and count them myself either. So
that's okay. I was just curious.
Yeah. I should have checked how many 4 and 5 stars are still on there, but it's still a very talented class. They're bringing back a number of receivers. I think the top three were their top three, three of the top four last year. The problem is we're not sure if there's any real standouts, like true number one difference makers there. But again, when they were juggling quarterbacks last year, and I think they had some offensive line problems, and that could have been 2 years ago too. They're also juggling quarterbacks 2 years ago because they had Haynes King, who's currently with Georgia Tech now. 2 years ago, he was the starter, and then he was banged up, so they had a different kid in there. So he played 4 or 5 quarterbacks for the past 2 years. And obviously that starts to impact everyone else's production and what they're doing and what plays you're running, obviously. So that's not talked about as much. It's just, a lot about Jimbo Fisher, but that's had an impact too. So my number 5, though, is Texas. And I kind of snuck them in the list. They were on my outside, then I put them in. I removed Miami, and I'll get to them later on. But, you have Quentin Ewers, and again, ideally Texas, from Texas's perspective, they do not play Arch Manning this year. And Arch Manning's chosen not to transfer out. He, was recruited and brought in knowing he'd sit behind Quinn Ewers, so he wants to be at Texas. He knows this. And he may very well start for 1 year and then leave to the NFL. That's an interesting path, but that's been his choice, right? Still.
Yeah, and we'll see how that goes with the fans and the media. I think that's going to get louder and louder.
Yeah.
But, maybe Texas will be up by a lot, and they'll get to see more of him than people thought.
Yeah, well, we thought he would last year, right? But then Quentin Ewers came out and stopped Alabama second game of the season. We're like, all right. And Quentin Ewers obviously had a shoulder injury 2 years ago when they lost to Alabama, and he stayed upright this year. So there's always those aspects. So if he's healthy and he's playing well, do we see Arch at all? And if Quentin Ewers isn't healthy and isn't playing well, then Texas probably doesn't have any shot at the top-heavy SEC, right? So, that's really hard to envision. But then, then they probably just go the Arch Manning route. But that's hard to see, right? Nevertheless, transferred a bunch of receivers in because they did lose some of the top guys like Xavier Worthy. The best one, I think, is Isaiah Bond from Alabama. He was quite good for the Tide last year, even though when we look at their roster, you really think they don't have a really number one NFL draft pick, like a top Hall of Fame type of guy there. But still, a number of different targets there. Linebacker Anthony Hill Jr. was a monster. Big 12 Defensive Freshman of the Year. So another top freshman linebacker. And he's plugged in there. So they have some playmakers on defense, particularly in the front seven. Again, the back end was horrific passing defense last year. That especially showed up against Oklahoma in that final drive where they lost to Red River rivalry. But this is a team with a talented quarterback. We're going to definitely see some playmakers emerge on offense. So it would have been better if C.J. Baxter had stayed healthy at running back. And we're going to see, I think, some guys in the trenches emerge. Some talented playmakers on defense. And again, this is a team that since the injury in 2009 to Colt McCoy has been like, we're right there, much like a Miami or Nebraska. And this is their opportunity. Their schedule: home against Colorado State, at Michigan, home against UTSA, who obviously is much below their playing level, but could actually win the American Conference. They brought a number of Power 5 transfers in there. ULM, Louisiana Monroe. Well, they'll actually play against General Booty, former Oklahoma Sooner. Mississippi State, Oklahoma at Dallas. That, air quotes, neutral site game. Georgia at Vanderbilt. Florida at Arkansas. Kentucky at Texas A&M. So once you get through those first, really almost first half of the season, first 5 games, where they have Colorado State, UTSA, Louisiana Monroe, Mississippi State. And a couple of those are going to be decent teams. They're just probably going to thump them. But they do have Michigan in the mix there. That back end's going to be quite interesting because they're going to be Vanderbilt. They're going to beat Arkansas, presumably, but road games. Decent schedule. And again, are they going to be in the playoffs? They're expected to beat pretty much everybody, except for Georgia and maybe Michigan. So I do have Texas as number 5.
I agree with that. I'm very excited to see Texas, and almost want to adopt them as one of my favorite teams. I hate that they do the we're back thing, like
Right.
win stuff first, but man, I'm excited for them to be good again.
I got Texas gear. I'm a Texas fan. My number 6 is Oregon. Let's see how this fast-paced offense operates. Are they really going to roll through the Big Ten? I'd love to see some fast-paced offense as opposed to this plodding bullshit we see as people who've lived in the Big Ten our entire lives, where we regularly see, 3 teams with top 8 defenses nationally, and regularly see 4 or 5 teams with the bottom 5 offenses nationally. Like, let's see some movement here. I would love to see it. We'll love to see the contrasts and how these teams operate. Maybe it'll push a little bit of a trend in the Big Ten. I'm fine with slow pace, plodding. That's all fine. But I also wouldn't mind a little speed and a little mix. Let's see Dylan Gabriel in here. Last year they were the number 2 offense, number 22 defense, but they're 55 in passing defense. So it opens up a little action on the back end, I think. Evan Stewart, like I said, transfers in. Tez Johnson set the single season record for catches, 86 last year. He is back in the receiving core. Top recruits on the D-line. Will have to kind of step up there. They've been recruiting them. Some guys have left. So we'll get to see some new fresh faces there. And again, secondaries, we'll have some guys fighting for time there. I did not take down their schedule here, so I'll have to rip that off real quick here. Oregon Ducks, though. I mean, you've got to be excited to watch their offense. Obviously, they're going to be a top 10, top 5 team here, at least initially. I mean, we're wondering if, though, they can win in the trenches, if they can win, they're going to have these agile offensive linemen. I think their tackle spots are supposed to be particularly strong. So will they be able to, really move around some of these guys, these defensive lines, particularly in the Big Ten here?
I don't have anything additional for Oregon. I think that they are them and Oregon State. Ohio State are easily the favorites to win the Big Ten, and I think every big game they're in is must-watch TV.
I do have Georgia number 7. I don't always pick, like a Georgia, Ohio State, Alabama, if they're just going to roll through teams and all that. But like I said, I think they have to play this year. Carson Beck was 3rd in passing yards last year, 4th in completion percentage. I think he's really good. I think he's a good quarterback. His receiving core is going to have some bodies, but are they going to be, Dominic Levitt's back, top receiver from last year, but wasn't necessarily high impact. Transfer Ben Yorski is in, and a number of folks from other Power 5 programs as well, but will they be able to do real damage? I love the running back, Trevor Etienne. They basically switched running backs with Florida, so I'm very excited to see those guys in. Top 10 offense and defense last season, but again, a little bit tougher opponents this year. Last year at Tennessee, Missouri, Ole Miss. Those are the tough teams last year. This season, Clemson, at Alabama, Texas, at Ole Miss, Tennessee. I feel like that's a lot more difficult schedule. They'll still have Auburn, at Kentucky, Florida, Georgia Tech. I feel like that's a nice kind of middle crust. And really at the bottom there, they have UMass, Tennessee Tech, and Mississippi State, who's still obviously better than the other two, but I feel like it's a much more difficult schedule. And they have about a third of the roster turned over as well, so a lot of new faces. So we'll get to see some new guys doing damage there for Georgia.
Yeah, I'd like that Georgia has a little bit more of a schedule that will test them this season, and chance to prove themselves and maybe get some redemption from last year.
Ole Miss is my number 8. 20 starters back from their 11-10 team last year. 13th in offense. They also portaled in running back Ja'Cory Kronsky Merritt. That's a hyphen last name. From New Mexico. 1,100 yards, 17 touchdowns last year. Defensive tackle Walker Nolan from Texas A&M, 5-star. 4-star defensive end Price something. I'm not going to try to pronounce the last name. Starts with a U. From Florida. 4-star linebacker Chris Paul Jr. from Arkansas. 4-star cornerback Trey Amos from Alabama. Several others. So lots of big transfers. Jackson Dart has been very efficient. He's turned from more of a thrower, obviously, to running kind of an option-ish offense. 3 700-plus yard receivers, though, last year. They can compete in the SEC. Lane Kiffin is a fun guy. They open up against Furman, Middle Tennessee, at Wake Forest. Georgia Southern's a pretty good Sun Belt team generally. Then they play home against Kentucky, at South Carolina, at LSU, home against Oklahoma, at Arkansas, home against Georgia, at Florida, and then rival Mississippi State in the Egg Bowl. I think we are going to have a good time with Ole Miss personally, and I see why they're ranked pretty high, but that's a brutal back-end schedule.
Yeah, the Ole Miss teams, the Mississippi States, there's so many Mississippi teams. It feels like one of them is usually pretty good and fun to watch. So that is my very valuable insight for this.
Well, you can't hate Lane Kiffin. Not really.
No,
the guy.
He is an exciting guy. You do kind of like that he's willing to, I don't know, throw shade. I guess the kids don't say that anymore, but he's willing to. He's not afraid of saying what he thinks and having a little fun with it. And I mean, he's proven himself. Since being fired, getting off the plane. He's really gone and won a lot of games that everywhere he's been. So,
yeah, I just can't wait for them to compete in the upper half of the SEC this year. Kansas State. Oh, that reminds me of when they were throwing ketchup bottles at him was that Tennessee last year? That was always a good time. They moved the crowd back, and the crowd came back, and they were kicking people out, and they delayed the game. That was wild.
What a time.
What a time to be alive. Number 9, I think Kansas State. Sophomore Avery Johnson chased out Will Howard to Ohio State, but he looked good as a freshman, more as a runner than a thrower, but they saw something there in him for a team that wins like 9 games a year now. Running back DJ Giddens had 1,200 yards, 10 touchdowns last year, so this looks like a running force. They added Dylan Edwards from Colorado. The O-line is being reworked, so there is a low floor potential, but this is expected to be a team to compete for the Big 12. 11th ranked in running attack last year. Defense should be deep. This is a team that's known for forcing a lot of turnovers. That's very exciting. They play at home against UT Martin, at Tulane, which is retooling a bunch of pieces, home against Arizona, at BYU, home against Oklahoma State, at Colorado, at West Virginia, home against Kansas, at Houston, home against Arizona State, home against Cincinnati, at Iowa State. A lot of teams are going to be expected to beat in there. A couple interesting games, interesting run offense. I think that they'll be a good time to watch personally in what could be just a logjam of a Big 12 for a good chunk of the season.
Yeah, Big 12 is usually that conference where it's like, do they play defense? And because they run some of that air raid offense stuff, that's usually you got a couple teams doing that in that conference, and whoever plays the most defense might win the game or turns it over slightly less. So I think the Kansas State game will be a great game.
Oh yeah, I think so as well. It's the only ranked team Kansas currently has on their schedule. My number 10 is Ohio State, right? Projected to be in the national championship game by most. Loaded running back crew with Travion Henderson, Quinshawn Jenkins. A little bit down last year on that Ole Miss team, but his true freshman year was fantastic. Mobile quarterback and Will Howard, who's not as exciting, but if we run into that run game, which is his strength, I think we could have something very interesting. Also, not to overlook some of the depth, on that in that QB room. Devin Brown was a high recruit that's still hanging out there, and Julian Sayin is someone that was highly recruited as well. Emeka Ibuka, still a wide receiver, hanging out there. 5-star freshman Jeremiah Smith will probably be a starter coming in. Denzel Burke, top cornerback in the defensive back end. Jack Sawyer popped last year as a D end. JT, not going to try and say his name, is back as well on that the other defensive end. There we go. Perfect pronunciation. I don't see anything wrong with it. Safety Caleb Downs transfers in from Alabama. So we're going to have future NFL guys. We're going to have great college guys, who makes the all-time team of this decade. We're going to have hopefully some good games. Now we got 3 cupcake games to start, which sucks. Akron, Western Michigan, Marshall. Come on. What are we doing? Then we play at Michigan State, home against Iowa, at Oregon, home against Nebraska, at Penn State, home against Purdue, at Northwestern, home against Indiana, home against Michigan. So obviously Michigan, at Oregon, at Penn State, and those are the 3 big ones. Iowa, interesting. Nebraska, interesting. At Michigan State, Indiana are teams that could be bad or could be sneakers this year. Indiana isn't projected to be just a bottom of the league team necessarily. And at Northwestern could be weird with their stadium set up playing on the lake with the wind blowing and the rain. Mm-hmm. If that's the case, especially later in the year, that could be just some weird stuff. They played a weird game. Was it last year with Northwestern where it was like 16 to something or whatever the final was?
Was that last year?
Yeah, some weird game. Interesting to me. So I have Ohio State ranked in there as well. Now, they're a team you're probably going to be watching a lot of anyways, but I think the schedule's at least a little bit more interesting this year as well.
Yeah, it's too bad they don't have a interesting non-conference.
Yeah, that's really sucky. I do have just a couple teams, honorable mentions. Miami, I had them in here originally. They're still talented. Still going to be keeping an eye on them. Cam Ward, number of top recruits, especially on the defensive side of the ball. What's Mario Cristobal going to be doing? Interested in Miami there. Florida's going to be playing someone tough every week, other than a couple of them. So Florida, it's unfortunate they actually had some guys like transfer out. Otherwise, they'd be a better team, but I think they've lost maybe a little talent and up to the schedule, which is too bad. Missouri, the team you like. One of the top QB wide receiver combos in the country. Could make the playoffs. USC, I probably should have carved some room out my top 10 list. Their quarterback looked good. His name is eluding me at the moment, but the quarterback looked good in the bowl game last year, stepping in for Caleb Williams. Zachariah Branch was very highly touted, recruited as an athlete, as they say, as a true freshman. Played last year, return guy, wide receiver, buried a little bit in the depth chart, I think. Super fast. Could be a breakout player this year. I literally put a couple dollars on him to win Heisman at like plus 20,000. Just in case something weird happens. I don't know. And could be interesting. Just saying. LSU, skill guys. What are you going to say? Quarterback, wide receivers? Sure, let's do it. Virginia Tech, very interesting. I believe they returned all but one starter. And Drones, the quarterback there, former Baylor Bear, not sure why they let him transfer out. They picked Shapen, who I believe is on a whole nother school as well, a couple of years back. He looks pretty good at Virginia Tech last year. They were right around 500, and this year they bring a lot of guys back. They look pretty talented, and he's a big runner. We all like the quarterbacks. You never know when they're going to take off for 30 yards downfield, and he has that potential. So a couple other teams
like that, unless it's against our team, and then
that is true.
Throw things at our TV.
Yeah. Any other teams you want to add that you're excited to watch on the old TV that you'll be looking for?
I think you covered a lot of them. I'm just excited for football to be back. It's hard to believe that we have games tomorrow morning. Well, morning
we do.
My time. But Florida State, Georgia Tech. I mean,
in Ireland.
What the hell? That's weird. But
yep,
that's great. No, I don't think I have anybody else that there's a lot, that when each team plays their first real game kind of determines how much more I want to watch them, right? Like if I watch a Tennessee game against Chattanooga and they win by, 10 points, I'm like, Tennessee's going to be bad, and I'm probably not going to watch them much more after that, right?
Right.
But, you get Notre Dame, Texas A&M kind of thing, so you got some interesting games in the beginning, and I think I am a little bit interested in Notre Dame to see, they always have their interesting independent schedule, but what are they? Like, I think we wonder about that every year until we get to the middle of the season and we go, oh, well, maybe they'll lose to USC.
Yeah.
And then USC loses 3 games, and you're like, well, so, I think that some of those become more apparent after the first couple of weeks, and I'll know what I'm looking for.
I'm not sure if we will be able to meet again before we start games on like the following Thursday here, but we can certainly do a recap of week 1. I'll look forward to that.
Indeed.
Thanks, Elliot. Talk to you later.
Thank you.
Please don't forget the money, man.
All my blessings, 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 all my blessings.
I need my blessings every penny. Daily counting every single one, I'm seeing plenty. Level up and watch that beater turn into a Bentley. See, I'm stunned, so I'm all I'm thinking, please don't tell me. Oh boy, she was